So I'm going to sort of give you guys a brief perspective of why we are interested in this and hopefully what we are hoping to build to enable science and the kind of problems we are interested in. And I'm happy to take questions. And I'm going to use, as it happens, biology as an example as well, some of the work in that space. So here's who we are. I mean, we are ultimately a architecture research lab. And our methodology is really application-driven architecture research, which basically means we sort of bring computing to breakthrough problems that are at the intersection of domain and computational barrier. And what does that really mean? That means we're really interested in problems that need significant algorithmic innovations, massive computational scale. There's a good external metric or a benchmark that tells us about goodness. And then, of course, there's availability of data if you're talking about AI, for example. And often all of this happens in collaboration with experts from domain, from AI and HPC, whether they are in industry or in academia. And our role at the end of the day as Intel is really to be the arms and ammunition supplier to conquer science, right? I mean, this is what we get measured on internally. Have we delivered things that make, some of these enabling things that make some of these things happen, all different aspects of architecture, programming, systems and all of those kinds of things. Ultimately, that's why we call ourselves application-driven architecture research. Now, why we are interested in AI is, I mean, we all know this, and I'm not going to spend time. The important thing here is, we all of us have already become comfortable in the sense that the balance is shifting from a balance of decision making is shifting, and we are quite comfortable putting our lives in the hands of AI. For example, autonomous cars, right? AI is of course writing poetry and playing games and all of those things, and we can see that algorithms have developed significant capabilities, just shift away from perception, right, to decision making, and that has important implications. It has come obviously at a huge compute cost. This is something that earlier was alluded to as well. This is why talent goes to industry as well, because massive computational appetite is a must, and it is growing. And the interesting thing though is more of this is going to happen, right? I mean, this is where AI is today. We are talking about trillion parameter models. We're talking about data mapped to Euclidean space. I fully expect we would have a 100 trillion parameter model coming 2022, 2023. Graphs as input data will become predominant. Shravan earlier referred to physics-inspired neural networks, causality, neural ODs, PDs, all of these things are likely to happen sooner than later. And this again has huge implications for science, right? I think frontiers in science will build on this foundation, and I believe the other way around as well, that significant AI capabilities will get built, which are foundational to AI out of science. And of course, underneath it, the compute appetite will continue to grow, the demand will continue to grow, and hence our interest, right? And the reason I sort of believe that is I think we are at the cusp of what I call a new frontier, right? There are very few problems in the old world used to be, at least in science, where we had some mathematical equations, and Einstein came along or a Newton came along, and we had somebody write a nice mathematical equation that was good in prediction. But there are very few problems in the world that really have all of that stuff, and those luminaries come once in generations and once in century. But thankfully what we have is data now, and that data is essentially going to go from from an inside out world to an outside in world, where we are able to decipher what's happening inside of these complex worlds, just looking at the data and being able to look further than that, right? I mean, that's sort of really what our excitement as far as AI and intersection of science is concerned. And there are many of these problems. I mean, this climate change, right? What will be an impact in a particular area? Can we really estimate uncertainty, for example? We talked about protein machines, or molecular machines, or morphable wings, or life sciences in general, right? I mean, there's a complex phenomena where there's no mathematical equation known, multi-scale resolution, the interaction dynamics are extremely complex. And if we hope for a brute force to come along, brute force compute to come along, it's going to be a while. I mean, it's probably going to be decades, a decade, 2 decades out, because every time we go 10x in a fine-grained revolution, fine grain resolution, we are talking about 3x more computational barrier. And I think AI in that sense is already telling us that we can go much faster than what otherwise Moore's law could do, right? In terms of novel AI algorithms that will replace or augment brute force computation by bringing approximation into play, right? And of course, when we are doing some approximations, domain knowledge becomes critical to algorithm development. Now, this is a work that we've been doing with Shravan, and in many ways, I think it's just the beginning, as he calls it, and he has much bolder ambitions. But the fact that AI could do something that would take months earlier to do in a matter of seconds itself tells you that there is foundational capability there. And this has been again something we've been engaged for about a year or so. This is from a science point of view. But I think here's why we are interested in biology as well. I mean, in addition to the physics side of the world, I think biology is like a perfect place to learn structures, complex structures, and some of those examples were given earlier. Causality is huge in biology, that we really need to understand it. Use of AI in simulations, and whether to do trillions of score computations, how do we approximate stuff to deduce all of these things is going to be fundamental. So biology in that sense represents an exciting opportunity. Similarly, on the drug discovery side, or proteins design side, right? I mean, search space is massive. So I kind of earlier referred to computational barrier, and you can sort of see the examples of some applications here where computational barrier is so massive that you need both algorithmic and computational innovations, right? And this, for example, one of the problems we've been working on, and we call it Lambda Zero, where the ambitious goal is that if we were, today's state-of-the-art physics-based simulations can search 10 to the power 9 molecules. And by the way, that's roughly the scale of internet today, right? I mean, web pages is of the order of billions. The goal is, can we go to 10 to the power 18 molecules, right? Of course, the drug space is much, much larger, 10 to the power 60. And if we really were to do true physics and solve, some Schrodinger's equations or whatever, we were never going to finish it. And if we do it today with brute force method, 10 to the power 18, it's going to take, I think, 1 billion years on today's state-of-the-art platforms to actually search this kind of space. So there's work that we have underneath going on with the Montreal Institute of Learning, with Yoshua Bengio's group, where there's innovation on graph neural networks, algorithmic side, and then obviously sort of saying, how do we speed those algorithms up quite significantly, make them computationally feasible, so that we can do search in this large hyperdimensional space. And one of the, this is the arms and the ammunition side of it. One of the components that is being used in this work, for example, is graph neural networks. And again, this is an emerging area in AI. Like I said, I think graphs are going to become big, graph as input data. And this was paper sort of we published, I think, last year, around how our implementation of graph neural networks, where we had to do novel parallel algorithms for it. Again, this is in my mind the beginning. We're still talking 100 million graph nodes. We will probably see graph nodes running into billions, and edges running into trillions. And then how do we really scale that kind of problem is going to be an interesting computational challenge. So similarly, another example that we have from biology, for example, and again, this I'm giving these more as a sense of what we look for in problems and the kind of challenges we try to work on. ScanPy is a very popular tool for single cell genomic analysis. There's a popular benchmark around 1.3 million mouse brain cells. Is an end-to-end workload, if you will, where you're starting with some cell gene feature map or activity matrix, and you want to go, you're trying to go through all of these different stages of all the way from data processing to some visualization finally. And earlier, what used to, for example, off-the-shelf CPU implementation, and that's what we got compared against a year ago or so on GPUs. They essentially CPU was shown to be taking 5 hours, GPU was shown to be taking 11 minutes. Huge difference, right? Our lab kind of looked at this problem and said that doesn't seem to make sense, right? I mean, we ought to be able to do better. Of course, we have larger interests in biology, and I'll come to that in my last slide, which is coming up. Is we kind of looked at this whole problem and said, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And today, for example, the same problem on CPU, we can take just 5 minutes, right? And it's an end-to-end problem, right? In some sense, debunking this whole idea that AI cannot happen on CPUs, if you will, right? And this is what we are after at the end of the day. I mean, this is kind of what I and Shravan and many of our collaborators we've often talked about is what is our vision for AI for sciences and what do I hope to build. And since I said in the beginning that we are the arms and ammunition supplier to help scientists like yourself conquer science, our aim is to drive a full innovation across the stack, and this means hardware, software, co-design. And it includes all of these elements from our perspective, right? There is an algorithmic component to it. Things that I think are interesting is, learning on large graphs. I mentioned about structure, search, causality, anomaly detection, zero-shot learning. These are all very, very interesting from a science point of view. Are foundational to AI as well. I think we will need to build a data management system that serves scientific needs. I mean, there is obviously always a big, and there's a, I guess a controversial name of the paper as well that I sort of marked at the bottom. Big data, is this astronomical or genomical? Irrespective of that, we would want to serve needs of both. And what this requires is for scientists to be able to use software tools or software capabilities easily. We need to think of a data management system that's able to do it seamlessly, such that it's one click for the rest of the world. On whether you want to go from a laptop or you want to scale to a cloud, how does it happen, right? What does that data management system look like? So we have research in that space as well. And then of course, some of these things may require security, privacy, and those things. Again, research is in that space as far as Intel is concerned. And we fully expect compute to grow quite significantly. How do we deliver next 3 orders of magnitude in just simple raw compute processing? What kind of compute does it need to be? That's again an area of interest for us. And then of course, while we grow compute, we got to feed the beast as well. So, and again, today's state of the art memory bandwidths, when we look at high bandwidth memory and that GPUs or state of the art CPUs will have, they're still of the order of single terabytes per second. Clearly, if you're growing compute this much already, in fact, actually we need hundreds of terabytes per second kind of. So what do we need to do there, right? That's kind of the span that we have, and ultimately we want to be able to build a stack like this. And our interest is always in problems that not only push the frontier in science, but allow us to sort of also decipher the computational needs of future in these terms, right? And that's kind of really my last slide. Questions, if any?
Thank you, Bharat. Questions?